Hi, everybody. Welcome to the program. My name is Rochelle Langdon, and I am the Adult Programming and Public Relations Specialist for the Vermillion Public Library. We are here tonight hosting Jim Reese, who is the author of the new book, Bone Chalk, and who will be sharing his experiences with us on a creative writing program implemented at the, the Yankton prison and specifically. And I guess that's it. If you want to go ahead and take it, Jim, go ahead.
Okay, thanks for having me. I wrote this essay that's in Bone Chalk for a high school friend of mine, Christina O'Day, who was raped and murdered by a classmate of mine who used to help me with my math homework in middle school. A student speaks of her sister's murder. At Mount Marty University, a student is writing about her sister who was murdered. She doesn't know how to tell her story once she has written the brief introduction about the last time her sister and family were all home together for the holidays. The details of the interior of the house, the piano music and cheer, the warm, welcome feeling of family sings on the page. She is worried about the chronological order of things. She is also concerned that these details won't mean anything to the reader. When she finishes presenting a rough draft, she continues to tell the story. She describes the random act of murder as it was told to her by authorities. She describes news accounts. Eventually, with my encouragement, she writes about it some more. The in-class dialogue this produces helps to some extent, although I don't think anyone fully heals from tragedy like this. During workshop, the student said she never found out if the killer was mentally ill or why he did what he did. Authorities gave him tests and concluded that he was, and the student can't think of the right words to say, that something was wrong with the man. They didn't know if he was on drugs at the time. He claimed he thought he was 100 miles away in Oakland, California, and he was stranded, and when he saw lights, he walked towards them, towards the restaurant and bar her sister and friend had just left the evening. When he demanded keys, they wouldn't give them to him. He chased them back to the restaurant and bar, back to the front door they were running to. But the door was locked. That's when he killed her. Later, the police found him 5 miles away with their car. It was a done deal. The cops had him, the stolen vehicle, and the murder weapon. She proceeded to talk about the trial. Before she went into the courtroom, she said, "We had a quick briefing with our lawyer. I asked if we could expect to see some of the murderer's family. The lawyer said no one had come to visit him the entire time he'd been locked up." She gives us play-by-plays of court proceedings. With tears running down her face, she said, "The man who killed her sister sat silent as stone. Eventually, her sister's friend, who was with her that night, read her victim's statement. I didn't take my eyes off the guy in court," she said. "I sat in the middle of my parents with both my arms around them. He just sat there staring blankly ahead, cold, lifeless. He wouldn't look at me." My sister's friend read her speech. She painted a picture of my sister in her life, of how adventuresome and how funny she was. Her statement captured my sister's sense of humor. And for a few seconds, I saw the man that murdered my sister almost grin at the funny, loving, and kind person that was being described. And then he must have remembered that he was the one on trial, the one that killed her, and his face again went blank. At one of my co-editors, Sister Mariel Frigge's presentations at the prison, we discussed being evil and doing evil in class. Later, when I emailed her about the classroom discussion, this is what she had to say. "I think the discussion started with a student raising the question, noting that since he got religion, some of his relatives were shunning, or at least looking down on him somewhat. In the course of that, he suddenly asked, 'Do you think there are people who are evil?' I said that I do believe that evil exists. Not as a character with horns and a pitchfork, but as a power that can and sometimes does influence people. I mentioned the book People of the Lie, Hope for Healing Human Evil by M. Scott Peck. Peck writes that his counseling experience convinced him beyond doubt that evil exists and that he had witnessed it in action in several exorcisms. Then I referred to a clinical psychologist. She recommended the book to me. It was quite a few years ago, and she was the one who gave the example of people she had encountered in her practice who came to her for help, yet seemed completely determined to act against any advice or guidance she would give. One of them had given a son a shotgun for Christmas, knowing the boy was suicidal. In light of Scripture and Catholic theology, no human being is born evil, but is created in the image of God. The choices a person makes have a lot to do with whether one does evil deeds, but of course, every human being's choices are limited to some degree by many, many factors, and that's where it gets messy. Many people also don't make a distinction between being evil and doing evil. The man who started the discussion in class has since been transferred to a high-level facility for breaking the rules at the prison. During class, I considered him one of my best students, thought that he was on the straight and narrow, that he was a changed man. I thought he had made the turn. He asked the right questions. He motivated others in class to be better men. He had a lot of us fooled. When I think of him today, I am truly disappointed. So were his former classmates. He's a talented man. He had some writing chops, but he was still conning on the inside. What's he gonna do when he was released and if he never confronts his evil doings? Most times when I think of him, I feel fooled for putting my faith in him. I feel a little naive, and I'm pissed off because he lied to me. I don't have empathy for people who lie right to my face. He knows the difference between doing evil and being evil. You want to believe as a school teacher that you can help everyone, but I've realized there are a few students I will never be able to connect with. I thought I had gotten to know him, but he had proven to be stranger still. Never talk to strangers. Where I come from, urban middle America with apartment buildings, rows of split-level houses and manicured lawns and shopping malls, never talk to strangers were 4 words constantly drilled into me and my friends. Because of a lot of us, we're latchkey kids. We like to believe the neighbors looked out for us. When the serial killer John Joubert volunteered as a Boy Scout troop leader to lure and torture young boys, eventually kidnapping and killing 2 kids in the same part of Omaha where I lived, he became the nightmare, proof of the validity of those 4 words. None of us will forget the police crime sketch on milk cartons and plastered to street poles, this gruesome profile of a man with his mirrored sunglasses and hoodie pulled tight around his head. It was my neighborhood he did this in, and we wanted it back. To sleep most nights, I curled in a fetal position and stared out my bedroom window shades. It didn't matter what our parents said to console us. They were full of hate, that this could happen in the Midwest, in the heartland. So we all reinvented worry. Never again would talk to strangers because every one of them was him. We looked over our shoulders and learned to run the second an unfamiliar car stopped and someone inside asked for direction. It was the paranoia of the 80s in Omaha. These were the war zones of my home, which made us aware of our surroundings. After peace and love had fallen on the cusp of cocaine and everyone began living faster and meaner. This was when you, John, were living with your nightmares, perhaps calculating rapes, cuttings, and killings. Ashes, ashes, John. No, no, no. 1990, the murder of Christina O'Day. Christina had been babysitting overnight. Chris Garza and another perpetrator cut the phone line, broke in a basement window, tied her up, slit her wrists, took turns raping her, and then left her to die. For a few days after it happened, the police couldn't find him. His head headshot on rerun on the news, the high school, the whole city of Omaha in an uproar. It was surreal, but it was our reality. In our high school hallways, I remember some of the friends Chris used to hang with before he dropped out, saying they knew where he was hiding. The gossip, the uneducated comments from some of those people in a class of over 450 was beyond disturbing and immature. The child Christina was babysitting is still alive, and the whole episode was replayed in the news 26 years later. WOWT wrote, Christopher Garza has been resentenced for the 1990 murder of Christina O'Day. He was given 96 to 110 years in prison. Judge Polk said by factoring in the good time law and time already served, Garza would be eligible for parole in about 23 years. Garza is one of two men who beat, raped, and murdered Christina O'Day as she was babysitting. At the age of 8, Beth Ann listened as the brutal crime unfolded. 26 years after the murder, a Supreme Court decision means one of O'Day's killers, then 16-year-old Christopher Garza, is in line for resentencing. That's based on new research, showing at that age, a portion of a juvenile's brain is not fully developed. When I think of this murder from my adolescence and the safe, split-level suburbia I came from, the fear is still ingrained in me. This is reality. Is there a killer inside me? If I think of my loved ones and what I'd do if something like that happened to them, it scares me. We could talk about eye for an eye. We could talk about the death penalty. However, that's being extremely irrational and paranoid. What I know is that most prisoners aren't heinous animals. They aren't wicked criminals. 1998, it's not just a criminal and a victim who are affected by crime. It goes much deeper than that. It affects whole families and communities. When she was 9 years old and her father was sent away to prison for manufacturing and distributing methamphetamine, my cousin said she walked around with a target on her back. For the next 9 years she was in school, until graduation. Kids couldn't play with her. She was branded, was considered an outcast. I was the bad influence. 2008, my first fingerprinting. I was in my office in the Midwest 10 years ago. I was a new assistant professor with editing and publishing credentials. I was blazing new trails at the college, and the supervisor of education from the federal prison in town was standing in the doorway of my office, explaining a new writing program, an interagency agreement with the National Endowment for the Arts. One of the main objectives of the new program was a book of creative writing and art from inmates. I'd been publishing books at small presses since I was an undergraduate. I knew the ins and outs of publishing, but most importantly, I knew how to teach complete strangers how to write. I had degrees on the wall that said so. And very quickly, after my initial meeting and extensive federal background check, I was at a federal prison getting my fingerprints stamped on official documents and my photo taken for my contractor's badge. 2009, welcome to San Quentin. When I first brought the news home that I'd be working in a prison, my wife was concerned, but she listened. The pay was good, and like most young couples, we needed the money. I reassured her everything was going to be fine. Part of our contracting training through the National Endowment for the Arts entailed working with the William James Association. There, we would visit some California state prisons and study their arts and corrections programs. So in my second year, as I filled out waivers about my safety, the CDCR will not negotiate for you in a hostage situation. Concerning my trips to San Quentin, I was scared, but I was already invested. There are lines we cross all the times in our lives, purposely and with good intentions. There are lines we know never to cross. This was the dilemma. One day in prison, a student in class told me a story about one of his greatest regrets. What I began to discover was that addiction, in all of its gross immaturity, will make people go to extreme measures. The student, an inmate in his late 20s, was built, as we say here on the plains, like a brick shithouse. He and I talked briefly at the back of class. My grandfather had a farm all 300. You had a need for hoses for your tractor so you could raise the lift cylinder and tilt bucket with the hydraulics. When the hose was missing, I'm sure he was shocked. When he asked me if I'd seen it, I lied. He said, I've had that tractor, I don't know how long. No one's ever taken a hose off it. What he didn't know was that I used that hose to cook meth. I can't keep feeling guilty about my past. I'm done paying that bill. But I tell you, I wish I'd never taken that hose. GED test result day. Hey, I passed. I really did it. 2 inmate students high-five each other. Way to go. I knew you could do it. The one pats the other on the back, men happy to be graduating. Their smiles frozen on Polaroid, ear to sky, soaring, alone now, free. GED test result day is always fun around here, the supervisor of education says. New Folsom Prison. There are few words for razor on flesh, for screen. Black, blue, cut, wet. I see some of you bandaged at the wrist or forearm, bandaged at the belly and throat. You are cutting to get out. 2014, the track. I'm walking the prison yard when an inmate student next to me begins to tell me a story I've never forgotten. You know, one of the prisons they had me at, I could step into a corner of my cell. I'd get a sliver of sunlight. It would hit me right here. He cranes his neck and closes his eyes and traces a line down the side of his cheek over the hard vein in his neck. Right here for about a half an hour. That was the only sunlight I'd see. It's mental deprivation. It works. Hell, most guards don't know what you're in for. They don't care. We were loaded on a 747 one winter. We're standing on the tarmac without any jackets, a bunch of us. Just a t-shirt, orange pants, no socks, no shoes. We had our legs chained at the ankles so tight I was bleeding all over my feet, freezing. Scars are still here. He stops and puts his leg on a bench and pulls down his sock to show me. You know, I'm no killer or sicko. My whole stint that got me here lasted only 5 months. Meth will eat you up. 15 years I'll be down for an addiction I couldn't shake. Could have never imagined. When my daughter used to come visit me, I'd be behind those glass partitions. She'd tell me, Daddy, roll down this window. I'd say, I can, honey. She'd ask, when are you coming home? Soon, I'd tell her. Now she wants to know the date. She'll be graduated by then. Writing for reentry. At the South Dakota State prisons where I teach, 57% of the inmates are nonviolent offenders, 86% of women are nonviolent, 65% of whom are drug offenders. That's from an internal monthly report from April of 2018. We cannot ignore our drug crisis. Tough on crime won't fix this. It's an illness. Back to the track. I really like the student I'm talking to on the track. He's a lot more honest than most people I know outside this prison. He means what he says. He's the kind of guy you want on your side. He's a good listener. He's in here for drugs, and honestly, I don't care. I'm not the judge and jury. We are beyond that. It's my job to help him never come back here. He's an amazing writer, spinning yarns of deep woods, Missouri kin. So it's surprising to me when he asks, what specific tree is in front of us with bark peeling off the trunk? River birch, I tell him. That's it. How did I forget that? You know, before I got here, I was at a different prison. Most of us trickle down the system to get to a place like this if we're lucky. And most prisons aren't like this. I never saw anything green, just concrete, dirt, and razor wire. I remember arriving in a minivan. The instant I got out, I saw this tree. I walked right towards it and touched it. I grabbed a hold of it and squeezed. The guard said, "Get back here, I need to process you." I told him, "Just hold on a second. I haven't seen a tree in 3 years." I wrapped my hands around it. I squeezed so tight. I'm a country boy. To be denied the outdoors was like a death sentence for me. I'm walking the yard. I'm thinking sunshine, handcuffs, plexiglass, scars. Some stats. I work at 2 prisons within a 50-mile radius of my house. Both those prisons were colleges less than 40 years ago. Each year we spend billions on criminal justice, but spend less and less on education. Right now there are approximately 2.2 million Americans behind bars. Each year, more than 600,000 inmates are released from federal and state prisons, and another 11.4 million individuals cycle through local jails. Around 70 million Americans have some sort of criminal record. That's almost 1 in 3 Americans of working age. 1 in 3. A recent 2013 RAND Corporation report found strong evidence that correctional education plays a role in reducing recidivism. Education is key to turning our justice system around. The study concluded that every dollar spent on prison education translates into $4 of savings during the first 3 years post-release. So if nothing else, if you're just worried about your tax dollar, that's why you should care. More importantly, though, is that prison education helps transform lives on both sides of this fence. You know, you can lock a person up and let them out after so long. Maybe during their incarceration, you teach them a trade, and that's all fine and good. What you also have to do is help them tap into the emotional instabilities that brought them to prison in the first place. You know, if a person never comes to terms with himself or herself, you're just going to send an angry person right back out into society. 95% of inmates will be released. A ladder, or a walk-in closet at San Quentin. Training at San Quentin Prison, I had access almost everywhere. Inside 4.5 foot wide by 7 foot high, 11 foot long cells, the size of your typical walk-in closet. The kitchen, where a man stood on a ladder stirring a cauldron full of spaghetti sauce with an oar. Medieval rooms, a 164-year-old cavern in the exercise yard. Even condemned row, where a longtime CEO said, "The men sentenced to die aren't animals. They've made some horrible decisions, some premeditated." At a cocktail party one evening, I met a man who taught yoga to men on death row. They're humans. It was odd to hear this with a glass of red wine in my hand. It was different from the fear I feel, the anguish I still possess over my friend who was raped and killed, the tight knot in my heart that every parent has, the horrendous feeling of knowing if that happened to my child, what I might do. Eye for an eye, while the Pinot Noir stained my tongue. Uncertainty when the glass was empty. Jesus Christ pose. In a theater practicum in San Quentin, I watch you, a prisoner, standing in the center of the room. You raise your hands, palms up, head dangling down, your Jesus Christ pose. You begin to stand on one foot. The room is quiet. People begin shifting in their seats. Minutes pass. You begin to lose your balance. Every morning, you say, after my foster father left for work, she made me stand in the corner like this. And when your desperate left foot hits the ground, you scream in the voice of a child being beaten. Now, I understand why some of you are here. Coda. Things that have altered me are crimes. When I was young, I felt like an outsider, a stranger, especially as an only child. Someone who is never afraid to ask why. I've never shaken that, nor do I intend to. We as humans are indecisive, are unpredictable. We act out. Have I ever been an insider? With my freedom, I will never be one of them, a prisoner behind bars. But I am human, and so are they. We are all family. I perhaps can only help them realize it through my classes and by helping them write memories they have of the past. Who really is alien in our culture? Could the stranger be the prison staff? The prison professor? How can anyone stand in judgment, petty or not? We are all guilty. We exist within physical and sociological entrapments, our concepts of freedom and staunch viewpoints. But these are all ideals we can free ourselves from if we are willing to learn. You know, I daydream that maybe I'll spot some of you holding your children's hands, running your tattoo parlors, catfishing in your favorite holler holes, facing your demons the best you know how. I imagine a greeting from an aging mother who still relentlessly milks the Holsteins, imprisoned on her own farm, the smell of rotten silage, and the overwhelming burden of not having enough time. She, though, will be waiting at her threshold, doors wide open for you. Imagine the toy brontosaurus on laminate flooring, pointing its head to your childhood bedroom. You will be welcomed again. And when you board that Greyhound bus to the halfway house, keep your head high. With smart time, you'll have only 2 months to go. And perhaps I played a part in some of this. Here in this place, any of us could have wound up in after a few misdirected decisions. As kids, we were taught to never talk to a stranger. But who is he? The kid in junior high who helps you with your homework? The unfamiliar person who takes you safely to school? Who really knows? I've been instructed never to get too close to any inmate, but I'm your teacher here, and I'm afraid that's just not possible. So tonight, like most nights, I carry you home. All right. So there's part of 12 years in prisons, a summary, I guess, or parts of it. The whole essay is in the book Bone Chalk. I should say that when this book was being shopped around, one of the publishers said or asked if I had some other essays, and I wasn't going to put this essay in at all. I was working on a book of crime and punishment, and it was about 200 pages, and it was really more academically focused, and I was searching for an answer for crime. I don't know if there's one answer. There's solutions to help curb crime, obviously, and those are things that I was putting together. I also spent about 200 hours doing ride-alongs with the police in my city so far. So that book is something I'm working on right now. But I was glad that I was able to condense that book down into about a 35-page essay, because I really wanted, to talk about what I was doing in the prisons, to make people aware of that. I think it's important, to tell a few of those statistics, especially if you don't know. And I'm glad I changed the focus of that essay too. I was working with a really talented editor and writer from South Dakota. His name's Kent Meyer. And he just said, hey, write an essay, because the publishers wanted it. They wanted something, especially something to do with crime. He said, write an essay, how crime has affected you and from when you were a child. And that's what I did. So I tried to pull out some of those pieces there for you so you could take a look at it. But like I said, there's a big essay in Bone Chalk if you're interested in reading more. I don't know, Rachel, if you have any questions or anybody else does.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away.
I see one here. It says, let me pull it back up here. says, what do you think it will take for South Dakota prisons to provide counseling or education? I know that both the state and federal prisons in South Dakota provide both right now. The education is different, obviously, in the federal prison than it is in the South Dakota state prisons. I know when I worked, I worked at the South Dakota Men's and Women's Prison for about 2.5 years. I just quit doing that. The funding ran out. And they haven't reinstated it, but we did a writing for reentry class that was hugely successful. I thought we actually published a book there called it was called Off the Cuff, Writing for Reentry. I don't know how many copies of the book they made, maybe 100, gave them to families and people, staff. I got a few copies, people that were in the book, but that was a really cool program, and I wish they would have kept that going. At the federal prison where I've been working, this is the 14th year, and I can tell you we're the only prison in the nation that I know of that has published a book consecutively for, this is the 13th issue is coming out in a couple months. So nobody's done that to my knowledge, and if they have, I would love to hear from them, just so we could, collaborate or do whatever we can. But I think that's pretty cool. The book we publish at the federal prison is called 4 p.m. Count, and we don't sell that. We give it away for educational purposes. And so if you want to learn more about my book and my work there, you can go to jimreese.org. You can type in your address and even receive a copy of the journal. But as far as counseling, I know that they have counseling services like RDAP at the federal prison. At the state prisons, they have chemical dependency classes, counseling. I know that they have it at the federal prison. I don't know what kind of counseling they have at the state prison, just because I was never part of that, so I don't want to speak on that. But again, I think it's crucial if you really look at those statistics, especially if you look at the women's prison and how many people have an addiction issue. Jail and prison is not a place for people like that. And no way are you, by locking somebody up, is that going to fix anything. You need to get to the root of the problem, and I think everybody knows that. And if there's proof, like the RAND Corporation study, that's a 5-year bipartisan study that said that every dollar spent on prison education equates to $4 or $5 taxpayer savings. Okay, so if we know that, then why aren't we doing it everywhere? It's really neat to see how more programming is happening. The federal prison here in Yankton is by far, people come from federal facilities all over the country to see what we're doing here. There's a great education program. Even during COVID, we've established, I can still teach my class through these kinds of means. I can't go in right now, but through the computer, I can teach my class, and that's really, really cool. A place like San Quentin actually has an accredited college now. I would try to pronounce the word, but I will not say it correctly. It's called like Mount Tomopolis or something. So I know that's not right, but they just started. They've been teaching. They had a prison university project, but the college just got accredited in the last year, I believe. So that's really cool. And they're running off of volunteers. There's the BARD prison initiative in out east. Lots of these things are popping up everywhere, and it's just nice to see that that's happening. Because when I got into this, another question says, what is the most valuable lesson you learned from your time working with inmates? I'll be honest with you, when I started doing this, I was 34 years old. I just had turned 34, and I thought it was pretty cool to tell people I was working in a prison. I thought it was cool to tell people I was going to San Quentin. I just thought that was exciting. I had no idea what I was doing. I knew I was teaching guys how to write, but I didn't know what a prison was. I didn't know how many people were locked up in our country. I didn't have any of the facts. was really more concerned with my ego. After a few years, I really could see how what we were doing was helping guys. And then I, lost the ego and jumped in and really said, hey, maybe this is it. It's all happenstance, but this is something maybe I'm meant to do. And it was neat to see how just a book and writing could help families come together again. A lot of people, as we all know, struggle to talk about problems. So when you can write something and really come to terms with yourself and admit your faults, it can help people heal. I remember the supervisor of education when I was first there, like right away the first year, she said, Jim, all you have to remember is, any of us could have wound up here after making some bad decisions. And she was right. And I really, learned a lot. And how many people in our country are locked up for addiction issues and drug-related crimes? That's something that needs to be fixed, I believe. And so more counseling, more education, and things like that will really help. So hopefully we can keep moving in that direction. But as we know, education helps, and if we can do that, I think there's all kinds of valuable lessons that I've learned. And that's why I'm working on this book, because there's just so many to share, and the understanding, of everything. And there's so many different cases and different reasons why people are incarcerated. So it's a big mountain, right? And I keep climbing it. And a good friend of mine, I used to, I didn't always know what to say when somebody would say something to me like, lock them up, throw away the key. And I remember a guy here in town, he says, hey, if we aren't all chipping away at the iceberg, trying to help people, then what's the alternative? And, I know education helps, so we'll keep doing that, and it'll keep getting better.
I was wondering, do you feel like working with inmates has affected maybe your ability to empathize?
Yeah, empathize.
Yes.
I know what you're trying to say.
Yes. I guess has it changed your perception of good versus evil, if that's even?
Yeah, for sure. Going into San Quentin, when we go into that room and spend a weekend there, I'm in a room with guys that are doing various art projects, and most all of them had murdered somebody. And even in that room, understanding different people's stories, whether it be the wrong place at the wrong time, or part of a group of people, and didn't pull the trigger, but you were there, or somebody who was beaten until they fought back. Those are things that happen, and I'm not justifying what they did by any means, but I learned, I understood why some of them were there. But really, I think bad decisions, maybe the way people were brought up, those are certain things that I saw a lot at the state prisons, at the federal prison too, affect why people do what they do. So again, we go back to, okay, then how do you stop the cycle? I ask a lot of people a lot of questions about this, trying to understand, trying to empathize, and just understand everything, And I remember I asked my daughter, I think it was when she was in third grade, I said, even when they're in third grade, by then, something, they know what's going on at home. It was maybe fourth grade, and the teacher said, I tell them, what's going on at home, what mom and dad are doing is wrong, so don't do it. And it's, it's hard because you want to help everybody. I mean, a student teacher came back to Mount Marty and she said she was out student teaching. And she said, and this is something I would write, and I'm writing in the new book, but she said there was a little girl at her table and she's playing with some chalk, and she makes a line of the chalk, and she bends down and looks at her friends and kind of pretends to sniff it up, and she goes, "This is how mommy takes her medicine." So, yeah. Here's another question. It says, have you ever had students who started your program as illiterate, or do they need to know how to read and write first? Yes, they do need to know how to read and write first. Everybody that takes my class has to have at least passed the GED. At the state and federal level, there's different things. They either have to take, required to get their GED, or required to take so much language arts classes, or can be penalized. And those are different from the state and the federal prison. But for the federal prison class, yes, they have to take their GED, have completed that first. So that is, yeah, so that's, but it's, you know, I teach in a federal prison, which is, according to Forbes magazine, the top 10 cushiest prison in the nation. So I've got guys with a GED and I've got guys with a PhD in my class. Same group. So that's an interesting arena to go into and try and teach. But it's pretty cool to watch how guys come together and help each other. And with one goal, you know, to tell a story, to tell their story. And they don't all, it takes a little while, you know, but, you know, it's working and it works. And I got a good system, and I also have people that help me. The staff there at the prison are really good at helping me with things. Like I said, Sister Marielle has been working with me at the prison since it started. She's the editor with me, and she goes in and does some conferencing with the men at a certain point in the program when they have some work ready, and she helps them with grammar issues and things like that. And so that's really good to have her help. And I have students help me here at Mount Marty as well, which is a really cool thing. And they get some experience then. And we've also had federal inmates come over here and do a reading with students, and we've had students go over to the federal prison and do a reading. So that's a really cool thing too. So we can get both groups of people together. We have our own kind of inside out program, and so I just want to keep doing more of that and just keep growing what we're doing, because it does help, and we know that. And those same kind of techniques help with all teachers, I think, in all classrooms. You know, if you can create a space where people feel comfortable telling their story, that really can make a difference in people's lives, a huge difference. I spent all summer doing a study, which is totally out of my wheelhouse, a BRIN study this summer, a biomedical research infrastructure network, about expressive writing and exercise. Okay, we know if you exercise, you immediately feel better. And I know that if you write, those can have the same kind of effect. So we did a study. It wasn't scientifically significant yet, because we only had 40 volunteers in a 2-month period, but we could see results right away. And if you look at my Facebook feed, go back to this summer, you'll see a video that we have, and you can see the charts for yourself that it works. So when you combine those, you know, it can be a huge help for anxiety, depression, all kinds of things. So all of this makes sense to me. I hope it makes, you know, and I think it makes sense to a lot of people that, you know, I just want to make the world a better place, I think.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you for working on that and being a person who's willing to work with people who have issues and have a stigma tied to them, I guess you would say.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we're all guilty of stuff. I mean, I did a lot of dumb things, especially when I was in my 20s, or early 20s, or a teenager. And look, I didn't get caught doing them.
Right.
So I got lucky. Otherwise, I could have been could have been in the same place those guys are at. So yeah, I appreciate you hosting this evening, Rachel.
Yeah.
And I hope to see you in person sometime in the next year or two, if we
Hopefully,
can.
yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And
And yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, thanks for
Oh,
everybody that tuned in.
yes. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And again, I'll either have this video up later this evening or tomorrow morning for reviewing or anybody who wasn't able to make it live. And thank you again, Jim, for sharing your story with us. And his book is available at the library for checkout if you want, but you can also absolutely, I would encourage you to buy it. I know it's available on Amazon, and I believe there's a couple other sources you can buy it off of too. I forget the names offhand,
Yeah,
but
you can go
Amazon's
to
a big one.
that'll get you the book, or go to Stephen F. Austin State University Press, and they'll have it as well.
Okay.
All right, thanks so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.